All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's another Big Boys Table podcast coming at you. Not live, but might as well be live because we are alive in the month of, it's like the third or fourth month of quarantine. What's up, Mesk?
Hi. Yellow fever is running rampant. Donald Trump is owning the libs. Trudeau is crying as his wife's boyfriend beats the shit out of him. And at the end of the day, it's still Necron's birthday.
It is still Necron's birthday. I actually think his birthday is coming up. It might have been March.
Happy 12th birthday, Necron. I'm so happy.
So, anyway, that's it. That's the podcast. So I actually do have a topic, but I don't expect us to necessarily stick to it the entire time. I am curious as to your take on it, though. Recently, I've been talking about progress that you make and still feel a dip in motivation as a result of it. And so that is sort of the whole point of the initial part of our podcast anyway. Of course, we'll probably spiral out and talk about a bunch of unrelated things after that. But I was curious as if you've ever experienced improving your skills in some environment or in some avenue, like, improving some understanding that you have of a certain technique or something like that. And then because you weren't able to immediately experience the results of that improved skill set, for example, like my concrete example for you is that I've recently been working on melee map style stuff. And even though I felt like I've improved at making melee maps by virtue of making melee maps, I haven't been able to test them, and that has stopped me from feeling like, I have a sort of a real objective read on what still needs improvement, what has improved, and like where to go from there after the fact. And that has been something that recently has taken a dip in toll in my motivation. And a similar thing happened with learning assembly, where I've been translating assembly into pseudocode, but none of the week's worth of effort or so that I've put in so far has resulted in any immediate changes to the functionalities that we have, just because we haven't actually translated it completely into a new function yet. And so because I've seen improvement in my skills as a melee mapper and as a translator for assembly, I've been able to say, all right, well, there's some progress there. But even though it's very easy to say that you've made progress because you further understand something than you did before, you no longer actually have, you don't immediately have something to look at and say, here's a crystallization of that progress. Here's, some result of that labor that is now forever, crystallized again. And the idea being that you can play a map or play a modified version of your mod or whatever that you can then take advantage of for that. So first question really is, have you experienced a phenomenon like this? And the second is, if you have, what did you do as a result of figuring that out, that was lowering your motivation despite the fact that you were making tangible progress? It just wasn't tangible enough to be motivating in that sense.
Well, I sort of encounter that in my D&D work a lot because there's a lot of menial repetitive tasks in it, like editing images and making maps in particular. So there was that map I finished recently. I did do an AK map prior to that one, but this was the first semi-high detail version of it. Normally what I would do at this stage when I finish a map is I would just move on to the next one. I don't need to do any maps right now for the immediate future. I actually have a little bit of a free time thanks to that. But normally in that case, I'd be go say, okay, so now I allocate my energy to something further ahead, so I'm not always doing stuff last minute. But what ends up happening is I tend to go through a cyclical phase where I end up finishing a chunk of work like this, and I have a large dip in motivation to keep going. It's usually because it's modular work, and you need all the pieces to be put together for it to really be finished.
Right.
So even though you get one thing done, you're still not really feeling that connection to having accomplished something because there's still a lot of work to go. So you can't really measure your success with an experience. Since obviously you need to play the game to get that experience, and you're on a time limit and you need to get everything ready for the game. So in this case, building the map's just one part. I had hoped to have finished the map last night. Didn't happen. I ground through it. No, it was the day before. Holy shit.
Yeah, your days are all fucked up lately.
Oh, they are really messed up. I got so screwed, but see, that's what I mean. I think it was 2 days ago. I thought I was pulling hard on all night, and I was like, yeah, I'll get this done. Bake letting, go to sleep, wake up, move on to the next thing. And then I ended up spending the entire next day hunting down small issues because that map is particularly hard to bake on production settings. It takes like half an hour. So I would then get distracted by something else, come back like an hour and a half, 2 hours later, and then there would be some other little thing I didn't check, and I wasn't like really focused enough. So then I finally got it finished. By the time I got it finished, it was the end of that day, and it consumed so much of my time. I didn't get anything else done, and then I kind of like took the. Normally, I feel better when I get something done faster than I expect, because then that gives me some free time to sleep, basically. But not this time. I ended up burning a lot of time on it, kind of unnecessarily, so that takes a lot out of it. And so I was thinking, well, this time it's time to take a break from mapping and focus on something else. It happens a lot with image editing too, where it's such a menial tasks in general are really draining, and it's hard to really like get engaged with them. And there really isn't like a key to instant success. Like when you're editing these images, you can't just magic wand it and say, oh, you're fucking transparent now XD, because you still got spots everywhere, and even the best of cases, you still have to do a lot of manual editing. It's just really as a time thing. So there was a portrait I edited earlier today. I think it was today, or maybe it was last night, that I had thought of yesterday. I was like, I took this portrait out of a larger image, and it has like a glow on top of the head that looks kind of small in the portrait. And I was like, I'm probably at a skill level now where I can actually edit this and change that color back, and then redraw the portions of hair that are removed by the glow overlapping it. And I was able to do this actually really easily and really quickly, but it really didn't feel like at that stage I was like, okay, I'm done with image editing for now, even though it was like a 5-minute job, because it was just one of those things where it's like usually I think what like sort of happens is it like it puts things in perspective of just how much work you actually need to do, and like the momentary high of a success can be offset immediately by that realization of like, yeah, I finished one map. Okay, on to the next 50 maps, right? Yeah. Like, many of them were more difficult than the one I just put together. The one I put together is comparatively easy. The ones I gotta put together are shit I've never even fucking tried before. So, sometimes to get somewhere in working on this stuff, you take an easy task, you take a low-hanging fruit. But that just actually, in my experience, makes climbing even harder, because once you've got the low-hanging fruit done, then you've got no choice but to take the harder stuff. And then what ends up happening is you end up finding excuses not to do so, which means, again, you cycle back to looking for low-hanging fruit, or you start procrastinating. So usually what I try to do is I try to do all the hardest work first. And that's my way, generally speaking, of tackling that stuff. So when I was working on the Unreal game project, that meant figuring out solutions for the models and stuff like that, and getting the AI navigating Z and other sorts. Like I tackle all those spots that I perceive to be problem spots right away. That's also like whenever I build mod concepts or something like that, I build what is called a conceptual, where it's like I seek out to determine how difficult it is to do the most difficult things, usually being like AI and stuff like that. And pretty much in every case, it turns out AI is just a hard-coded fucking mess that you really don't want to deal with. Or I get kind of baited into it, like in StarCraft 2. But with StarCraft 2, there was a lot of really careful risk management about that too. I did spend an extremely long time researching StarCraft 2. I definitely know more about building graphics and assets and AI for StarCraft 2 than probably anybody else on the planet, to be honest. But at the same time, I didn't invest into low-hanging fruit. It would be like using that knowledge to build a bunch of assets for a project ahead of time before the data and stuff is completed. I intentionally withheld myself from doing that, because what would actually end up happening is if I went to the effort of building all these assets, and then we swung around and we ran into the problems I ran into, where it turned out the AI just really can't be made performant at all. or issues with the other performance, like the pathing and stuff like that would give me issues or whatever, then it would turn out that it'd be like, oh, I put in all this effort and it's a huge waste of time. That's kind of like the problem I had with Black Sun Retribution and the D&D games I was playing before I ran my own. You know, you put a huge time investment into something and something comes up and it basically invalidates all that investment. So
yeah, that's why you call it risk management, right? Because you're making sure that you don't go down that hole.
Yeah, especially because of Retribution, I adopted that kind of thing. Before, when I made projects, I was very free-spirited about it. I would just throw whatever into whatever and just call it a day and just, you know, do whatever. Like Black Sun, Retribution, basically, if I felt like making a model, I made a model. If I felt like remastering particles, I'd remaster particles, and I'd go through all these things. I mean, not unlike how I'm doing D&D right now, but...
Oh, you died. So how do you feel?
Oh, knowing my that the fucking last 10 God. Minutes are gone? What did you even say?
I was just I think I was just agreeing with something that you mentioned about waiting for like a risk assessment and stuff. We were still on that topic. Oh my fucking
God, that was years ago. That was God. I knew this was gonna fucking happen because it DC'd me right before we started, and I was like, it's gonna fucking yank me off the fucking pants again.
Destroyed.
Oh my God! I was talking about like, Jesus fucking Christ! I have to like start over. Oh my God! So
I think you were giving me an example of what you would do to avoid allowing yourself to become demotivated.
Well, there were so many things I talked about. I don't even remember half of them anymore. One of them was like, if you get into a habit where like you got a lot of work to do, and some of it's difficult and some of it's not so difficult, you may not feel motivated to try the difficult stuff, so you end up doing the low-hanging fruit, and you keep like kicking the can down the road, and you'll just keep doing that until you're done the easy stuff, and then it actually gets harder to do the hard stuff afterwards. At least it does for me. So one of the things I do is I always tackle the hardest work first. That's why I have a risk assessment where I build concepts for stuff. I look to especially see like the AI and stuff like that. Like StarCraft 2, I invested a lot of time into researching the AI and the graphics. And I know more about graphics and AI and stuff like that for StarCraft 2 than probably anybody on the planet does. And
right. We got this part. And then I think this is when you got destroyed shortly thereafter.
Yeah.
You were talking about like you didn't want to go into the data, and then when you found out that the project was unsalvageable based on AI, you get destroyed.
Like I didn't want to build all the content for something that I didn't know was going to work out. So a lot of time went into the AI, especially because nobody had the balls to get into the AI except for HKS. Yeah. All of Mapster had no balls. Everybody at Blizzard had no balls and didn't even know how we even got the AI fucking working. And StarCraft still can't get over their asking us about that.
Yeah, but this is like the core philosophy or like the core element of the game or mod or project or whatever it is that absolutely needs to be done in order for everything else to work at all. And in order for everything else to be worth it, you need to know whether or not this core component is even going to work. And so you risk assess by doing that first, despite the fact that it is going to delay the your ability to actually feel motivated based on the response, because like it's going to be a lot of R&D. It's going to be a lot of like tentative, like, can we even do stuff? I had a similar thing when I was exploring Warcraft 3, which is I think around the same time you were exploring Warcraft 3 in like the last year and a half or something. So
probably when I did the LP or something like that.
Oh no, it was when you were trying to do your project.
Oh yeah, and I just like started freezing the game over and over again, which I am convinced is a bug from their latest patches, because I've literally never run into that before.
Yeah, well, suffice it to say, we abandoned it way before Reforged came out. So.
Yeah,
but I can only imagine how much worse it is now. They had broken the game long
before Reforged.
True, yeah, that's true. I think the editor
they
was
released patches that just broke like over half the maps in the game and then just left them broken.
It's StarCraft 2 and remastered all over again.
You know, the funny thing about AI is at the time with StarCraft 2, I felt it was just too early because Mapster was just some shitty curse website, and most of the people on it clearly hadn't hit puberty yet. And maybe in like a couple of years they'll probably start working on AI and stuff like that. And now we fast forward like 10 years.
We're over 10 years
and
after
now
the
we
game
have
released, or almost 10 years.
people posting on CC saying that these what is it, the Zerg campaign easy is now the ideal difficulty for their campaign.
I mean, that is brutal, to be fair. That is the Star Edit Crusader. In fact, we probably should talk about that at some point. That has been like a recurring theme that's come up more recently lately as a result of a couple of projects being edited by lunatics, to put it lightly.
Oh, yeah. He's stealing people's projects and just nerfing them because he sucks at video games.
Well, admittedly, the content he is nerfing is probably really unfair and bullshit, but still, yes, that is the justification, it seems like.
I mean, I think all the projects are bullshit in general, but like he really is just taking other people's work, like polishing a turd and then trying to take credit for it. It's kind of like Andrew Rosa putting his fucking name on the copyright for fucking
for enslavers or whatever. Well, that was more what I was referencing anyway, because like the fact that you have a situation where you're dealing with fucking, I don't even know what you would call it. You'd call it like, you have a situation where you have this default project or whatever that came with the game or was made by somebody else. Either way, it was made by somebody else. It wasn't made by you, and you're going to put the finishing touches on it apparently and bring it up to snuff. And you want credit for it being a new thing instead of what it is. And you're also doing it in such an asinine fashion.
But it's not your copyright.
Oh yeah, well, I'm not even talking specifically
about
illegal
shit.
Yeah, that could for sure. I mean, it certainly wouldn't be enforceable. Is the thing is like when you put C with a copyright symbol next to whatever it is, that's the same thing as like writing "it's fair use" in your YouTube bio.
Like if this was 2001, you would actually get litigated by Blizzard right away for this. This is the kind of shit that got stuff like the Infoceptor Warcraft 3 conversion shut down right away. If you even so much as like use the word expansion in any of your wording, you got in a DMCA. Blizzard basically invented the modern DMCA. You know how the DMCA is weaponized? It's like this foolproof way to silence people now because you have to basically dox yourself to fight it. Blizzard basically invented that. They're the ones who really kicked off doing this shit, and it was because of this crap like that. If you ever put your name anywhere near theirs, if you ever called anything an expansion or even hinted at an expansion in any fashion with the wording or anything like that, you got a DMCA immediately from them.
Depressing. I just feel like these people are very rarely actually going for the you had some comment. I don't even think it was in a podcast. It was just an offhand on Discord. But you mentioned that like modding is pointless without ASM. Like everything is pointless without like actually going for like the top.
These people have no best. Fucking like. I get that this guy wants to make a campaign that's for people who taste Windows. Okay, sure thing. But like, why go through the days or weeks or whatever of fucking around with these stupid vanilla scripts that don't even work properly? When you can just fucking take an AI editor, make the AI do what you want to do to some acceptable extent within like 5 fucking minutes and call the job well done. See, one of the things I was talking about when fucking Discord crowed me out of existence is the tools in the pipeline are such an integral part of not burning out, because all these tools you work with, like especially like StarCraft 2's editor and shit like that, they're designed in such an asinine way because they're just a net library that was just blindly compiled because the company never uses shit. Blizzard used XML editors. The train editor is based on something they used. You can see it in one of their making of videos. You can see the train editor, and there is basically nothing else at all for dealing with any of the data or anything else on their window at all, period. It's just the train editor, and that's basically it. Everything else is done through XML. That's why XML still has functions you don't have exposed on the net editor. And the net editor is so fucking slow and disorganized and doesn't lay out the information in an intelligible fashion. Nothing is labeled correctly. Like, why the fuck is cooldown labeled period? Like nobody actually in their company, not a single person ever looked at this editor and even like tried to make something with it, even considered making something with it. They just threw in whatever the net library vomited onto it, and that was it. And as a net result, even if you become very, very proficient in using this tool, you really don't become that much faster at making your work. There is no way with StarCraft 2 to really expedite the process of building content unless you build your own XML parser, which is something I was having Ricky do at some point way back. And, just this little mock-up at the time was so much faster to deal with than StarCraft 2 shit. Basically, sorted it out like the user interface would, and I think it handed you XML or something like that. It was just a fast and easy way to get in there. Like, I mean, you can even just think of chat applications. Like, why does Discord need 3 gigabytes of fucking memory other than to mine Bitcoins? Yeah, don't. A chat application never needs to be any more than 80, 90 megabytes tops. And that's if it's like displaying images and video and shit. And anything beyond that, you don't need any of this shit. It shouldn't be that big. It shouldn't be that slow. And tools are super bad for that. Like, all these fucking editors, they all use different control schemes from each other, and they all use different control schemes from shit like 3ds Max. And these are the tools that people are using to build assets for their games. So why are their control schemes always so different? In a lot of cases, you can't even rebind it. And to make matters even worse, a lot of these programs make heavy use of shift and control. And those are just buttons you're not really supposed to be pushing. You're not supposed to be using your pinky to be holding down pressure on something for long periods of time. It's hard on your fingers. And it's one of the reasons why I have severe arthritis in my fingers is from 3ds Max. Like, there's just all these little things that all really pile onto each other that really make the process of building content really unfortunate and oftentimes really aggravating. And the thing is in order to really be like universally successful, you have to enjoy all this work. You have to enjoy ASM. You have to enjoy 3ds Max. You have to enjoy unit testing. And we're in an age where people are using JavaScript for fucking everything and pushing WebAssembly onto people so they can mine Bitcoins. And a lot of people don't even think that unit testing is even necessary anymore. And then we wonder why every fucking game is filled with hysterical fucking bugs literally a single playtest would have caught. It's because nobody even believes in the process of testing anymore. But you really don't want to have that problem. You really don't want to run into this shit where you're kill a hatchery and half your fucking map stops working.
I mean, that sounds like my kind of map. I want to be able to just turn off the AI by killing one structure. That actually sounds like StarCraft 2, honestly.
Yeah, StarCraft 2 still does that.
Well,
especially since they're not even using the actual AI framework that is in the game. But none of those games are particularly resilient against losing their main base.
True. Well, that's actually one of the things that we've recently been able to fix with custom AI. But of course, that would involve using something like SCM Draft, plugins, mods, and Brood War instead of vanilla.
Modern tools.
And so you can't use
I just
Brood War.
Can't get over the Brood War thing. Like that, to this day, that still keeps me up at night thinking, like, can you even buy StarCraft without Brood War anymore?
You can't buy StarCraft at all. It's free.
Oh. What? Okay, well, that makes even fucking less sense. What the fuck?
Well, this person doesn't actually have Brood War. They've refused to download it from any of the free sources, including Blizzard's official source. So,
I guess when you're Lebanese and you've done nothing but like suck radioactive sewage out of Brazil for your entire life, you might start thinking that maybe Winnie the Pooh's farts that give you yellow fever are a blessing from God.
Well, I would believe it. That is one thing specifically that is like a very questionable aspect. Is like it. The whole really this is like a completely different topic anyway. But the idea is like based on philosophy and a lot of reasoning and a lot of introspection. A lot of people who have thought a lot long, hard, and veiny about this particular topic have come to the determination that we do not actually have free will and we are all products of our environment solely, basically. Yet we still do expect people to actually have some accountability for their actions. And I think that even though, like, in theory, things are deterministic in some sense where you can't really account for that, I do think that if you treat everybody as if they have accountability, you increase the likelihood, even though that doesn't really matter in this context, but you increase the likelihood of them actually cleaning up their behavior and smartening up. And this thought is adjacent to the thought of me laughing hysterically as I receive email bribery from a Lebanese guy.
I think that guy's actually fucking stupid.
Yeah.
I blew him the fuck out on CC, and he still hasn't pulled together his marbles to come with some fucking brilliant reply. Maybe he'll come back in like 3 years and cry about Trump again or something.
Yeah. I still can't believe he decided he would chime in about a feud that we had.
I don't think he's ever done any research on anything.
Because
I mean, that's evident by most of his posts, but
yeah, listen, just think about that, man. Somebody decided to take sides in an imaginary argument that's not only dated, but also like not even the same thing.
I don't even understand why he even brought that up in that thread. Like,
it's because he wanted to own you for liking Trump,
long
dude.
Before the nipple clamps came up, but
nipple clamps.
He really, like, at no point did any of his posts make any sense or have any relationship to anything I had ever said. Like, the post of mine he quoted where I was saying that was like, hey, you know, if Trump does this and that, he could actually be a good president. And, I mean, I don't even fucking follow politics because politics are fucking morons. But he, for some reason, I guess read something on Reddit and became a blue checkmark overnight or something. I got so many messages about that when that happened. I still have people to this day that message me every single time he bumps a thread. And it's like, oh, look, this retard is necro posting another 10-year-old thread shilling his fucking malware and making non-reviews while trying to review things.
Yeah, that does get me too. I don't know, man.
It's funny because all he does is just copy shit that I said. He like listened to one of my reviews, and then I don't make content that much, so he like ran out of stuff to parrot. So now he's just like copy pasting shit from some fucking Google document that he made for himself. And just like shifting words around and calling it a review. But he does it within a span of like 2 or 3 sentences, and there's no way you can fucking review a campaign in 2 or 3 sentences.
Though I suppose that is the effort mandated by the quality of most campaigns. So I can't necessarily fault him, but he's usually saying
the other
the
question.
opposite thing.
Like, what compels you? Like, I doubt he's played half the shit that he claims to have reviewed, but even if you've played only 10% of that shit, that is a lot of refuse to shovel into your mouth.
Yeah,
like,
and it's
do
not
you
even
want
like
to
he
go to
makes an
Wuhan
account
and try to get yellow fever from like imbibing sewage? Because that's how you get it.
Well, it's not even like he makes an account of it. Like he creates an objective account of it through a Let's Play or something. So there's nothing. Like for me, it's like, oh, let's see what insanity I can cook up from this playthrough.
Yeah,
let's see what can be added to
is that
Mixplay.
he's exposing himself to all this rancid content willingly.
Yes. And with no other upside.
It's pretty gross.
It's just to fill his Google sheet, dude.
And then he thinks that micro missions are good. I mean, I think you can make good micro missions. I think you'd have to make an entire project around the concept, and I think you would absolutely 100% need ASM and some really major hackery. I can see a way to do it, but of course nobody's ever done it. And
I sort of did. I just haven't released it yet. It's pretty epic. You're basically playing a MOBA, and there's AI, and that's it. I mean, there's no AI enemy MOBAs yet, but there's AI controlled macro.
Something like a bullet hell, kind of. With like physical projectiles and stuff like that, and focus on it. Like I said, it's something you need ASM for because you would need tactical AI to control. I mean, I don't know. I haven't seen what you guys have done with the AI and micro, but I feel like you would need a system to handle the micro necessary.
You would need a different subroutine entirely for like enemies that are meant to be corollaries to the player, like analogs to the player. Like, oh, the player is playing as a hero in theory, or a MOBA hero, or whatever they're playing as. Like, you would need enemies that are equivalent for dual fights or something, and then that would have to come at the like they would have to have specific elements that are completely distinct from conventional macro gameplay. That's the thing. Nobody really talks about that. Nobody really talks about the fact that you need entire new gameplay systems, and they don't even bring up AI and all that just to justify micro missions.
You'd have a better time doing in StarCraft 2.
Yeah, it would even perform because you don't have real AI.
Yeah, exactly. You have a tactical AI system you can feasibly use for this. I mean, you can do it through triggers too, and you can do it a hell of a lot better than you can do it in StarCraft 1. But again, nobody has ever done this kind of shit before. Nobody wants to do this kind of shit. They'd rather just have indicators and like point and click, or oh god, those Antioch 3 bosses where you have invulnerable allies.
Yeah.
Or allies that force you to run a chore by pushing a button on them every so often. Like, I think that you hypothetically can make the WoW boss system work in there too. Like, I'm not going to say it's impossible for it to...
Well, then you would need
done,
AI to control the allies that are meant to make up the rest of the raid or whatever. You know what I mean?
You need to actually replicate a WoW boss fight, not just turn it into a wait and then an occasional button press. But the thing is, like, these kinds of people who make these projects, they try to do something like copy-paste those WoW boss fights, but they've never actually even played World of Warcraft before. They've certainly never raided before. They certainly don't have the game experience necessary to replicate something they may have read on something like Wowhead. You know, these are just the kinds of people that just should never be anywhere near an editor.
Well, when you consider the amount of grind that you have to go through to get to the point where you have enough experience in World of Warcraft to replicate that kind of boss fight, I understand why they don't have that experience, but then I don't understand why, without the requisite experience, they bothered trying to make it or port it or
it
make
brings
some
a lot
homage.
of things in. Like, also, if you think about it, that grind for World of Warcraft, as big as it is, that's nothing compared to making a fucking project.
Oh yeah, in terms of hours spent.
Even a simple project, that's a grind. Like, and that's one of the things that I was talking about when I got fucking crowed, is if you reach a point where when you do something and it feels more like a relief than an accomplishment, that's where your problem is. And there's so many things that take you to that point. One of them is the grind, where, like, especially, like, that's why I was talking about the tools and stuff being an issue, is because if your pipeline is slow and you can't really improve it, which in most stuff you can't, unless you're making your own tools, then that's going to make things feel like a chore. And no matter how good or how fast you get at it, if you're always being held back by shitty tools, as you are with, with Blizzard stuff, and especially with like Autodesk and stuff like that, like a lot of these programs is just like, you ask, these programs go through 20 and 30 major versions, each costing $1,000+ a seat, and their interface has never fucking improved whatsoever. They just get heavier and heavier and heavier in system resources. Even the average Joe starts to put two and two together and thinks, they're milking stupid companies who need to keep fucking paying them. And it's just like, for the end user trying to make a project, you gotta shovel through all this crap. I mean, that's always been an issue with modding. It's like every single person has to fucking pirate 3ds Max. That's like your fucking, moment of puberty for starting, custom content for StarCraft, is you pirate 3ds Max and figure out how to render stuff out of it. Or, Lightwave or whatever back in the day. Or Rhino 3D, as was the case for some of us. That's how you get into this, is if you've never got into any of this stuff before, you figure out how torrents work, you figure out how Usenet works, you figure out how Kazaa works, you get 3ds Max or Lightwave or whatever, you figure out how to make your graphic. That's how you make your graphics, unless you had some kind of pre-existing image editing skills and you were confident doing git bashing. I will tell you, a lot of people were confident, but they didn't produce any good results. You are stuck doing it this way, and that was just kind of expected. Then he got exposed to that, and the program actually hasn't hardly changed at all for user friendliness since those days at all. And, you have to enjoy that stuff. You have to be ready to slog through that, because otherwise you're not going to put in your all when it comes to things. You're going to try to find excuses. And if you're trying to find excuses, you're already in a super bad spot. And that is how a lot of shit goes downhill with projects. That's why you end up getting a lot of stuff like feature bloats, feature creep, a lot of like shuffling of goalposts and stuff like that. I mean, you see that in the corporate world just as much as you see with mods and stuff like that. And it's just because people have no fucking discipline and they have no drive. Well, it's very easy to show that the vast majority of people who make games for a living have no actual passion behind making games. They're doing it just because it's an extraordinarily easy way to make money that requires no pre-existing skills whatsoever. You basically buy middleware and shill your way to the top, and suddenly, well, before you know it, you're Neil Druckmann or Chris Metzen. So Like there's so many faces to go from. But what I was saying before I fucking lost my whole train of thought and got derailed by this fucking pedophile service known as Discord. Like, the way I try to deal with the motivation drop is, again, I try to do the difficult tasks first. I do try to leapfrog my work a little bit so I don't get too focused on one thing. If I see that I'm spending a lot of time on one thing, I sometimes will intentionally take breaks from it. I have brought that up a few times in the podcast. Between my real life insanity going on, I haven't really had any energy or time to devote to making videos. But I was actually like casting videos and stuff like that. I had that motivational drop too. I'd finally get something done and then just stop for a while. And like, it's something I've always known about, but never really like had a way to put it to words. So it's definitely something I'm familiar with, but that's why I would try to go between something, is I would try to like detox from an experience, especially like in Black Sun, because all of that was fucking horrible. And then it came to dealing with people, and then, you know, the D&D stuff, the initial experiences with that were also really negative because of people. So you have to try to find a way to kind of like focus on what you enjoy about something. You try to structure your workload around that. So, you know, maybe people like to taste radioactive medical waste and taste windows and stuff like that, and Zerg Campaign Easy is their idea of a perfect project. Okay, but you would sure do yourself a favor by just putting in your own AI and saving yourself a lot of time, because then you've got more time to actually work on your project rather than trying to fix something that you really can't actually fix. Like,
well, it kind of brings us full circle, which is good, because I have a point related to the whole idea of custom content in the first place. And that point is, most people don't consider a project to be something that they have to spend a year plus on. They usually want to bang it out in like a month or so. And that is like the first fallacious proposition or whatever. You know, you walk in and you think, all right, I'll learn this and I'll make a map in a day. And that never happens in the high end of content.
And it's super demotivating too. Like, they could have the potential to make something, and then they realize how much work it's actually going to be, and they just immediately tank.
Right. Instead of being open to the idea of the work taking a very long time and not being worried about how much time it's going to take, or trying to not like minimize the amount of demotivation that you receive from that sort of thing, which I guess is in keeping with the whole topic in general. The idea that you're making progress, but it's incremental and it's not enough to immediately experience. Like, that's sort of the whole point, is like you have to be able to be okay with that and sort of learn to enjoy the victories along the way. You called it low-hanging fruit, but I would say like some things that you can do that remind you of the worth of the entire operation.
Well, when you're just starting off, you really are looking for low-hanging fruit, right?
Yeah, that's true too, because you need to.
Because you're trying to expose yourself, and I mean in a very platonic way.
Yeah, you're trying to expand your horizons. You're trying to figure out what you can even do, what your skill set is, and like what you're naturally inclined to be good at, what you're naturally inclined to be motivated to do in the first place, and then shore up the weaknesses in your workflow the same way you would shore up the weaknesses in any project, which goes back to an even older idea.
It also should be a way of auditing your tool set too.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's almost like you're risk assessing a bunch of different things at the same time. You're risk assessing how your personality and your own motivations conflict with your workflow and your workspace and your tool set. You're also risk assessing how useful your tool set even is, and what the limitations of that are, what the limitations of the engine you're working with are, and that sort of thing. But nobody comes in with this sort of top-down approach, and admittedly, I don't think either of us did either. We are just able to, we learned from our past experiences and then applied it into future projects. And now these are useful guidelines to work within. But
yeah, when you're just starting, you don't even think. I mean, today is a lot different than when I started, because I started in 1998, and I didn't even, it was on dial-up for years and years and years. The research didn't really exist. The information I wanted back then doesn't really exist today either. So, but a lot of information does exist today. Like, I think it's certainly a lot easier to say today that you probably shouldn't be using default AI campaign stuff in StarCraft given how much generally available information is, that it's really buggy and fucked up. Whereas back in the day, if there was reverse engineering projects, they really weren't public. So,
well, the other thing to consider is that most people, when they're working on a custom campaign, like this is the other thing, is like it's the back end to the idea that most people who are working on a custom campaign don't look at it from the top down. They don't consider the time investment that might be necessary. They don't think in the long term. They just want to make a project now, and they don't really care what that quality of that project is. In some cases, they claim to, and maybe even delude themselves into thinking that it is high quality. But admittedly, when you're first starting out years and years ago, like in your era, there's a lot less quality shit to look at. And there's not like a huge boon of quality shit now, but there's a lot more documentation on what it takes to make quality shit by comparison. And so there's more stuff for you to mess around with as far as the quality goes.
You also typically have... I imagine the Internet Wayback Machine has Star Alliance's site on it. But usually, like, what makes sites like, well, it would have been CC's old site now, but sites like Star Alliance and Maplantis particularly useful is that chances are, if you have a question, someone has asked that question at some point years and years and years and years and years ago. And if there was anybody answering questions back then like that, it would have an answer. And that information is just there waiting for you to find it. So,
or the information, how to get that information, or something there.
Yeah,
like you can find a chain that will lead you to where you need to go based on what you search.
That's the same with tools, right? Like if you're working, like when I started doing a lot of image work for D&D. Photoshop is so fucking slow and really, really unstable, and it's just been like that for basically all of its versions. CS2 is better than all the newer ones, but it's still really clunky. So at that stage, it's like, well, I'm going to be working a lot with this stuff. I want a tool that's better. When you feel like your tools are holding you back and it's something general purpose like image editing, then you start, looking around to find other tools. So HK has said to try out Krita. And Krita is just some free thing. I don't know if it's feet or not, but it's very, very niche, not as well known even as Paint Tool Sai that I know. I watched someone who draws with that, and she taught me a lot about that. But it works very, very well. Now I use that for basically everything except for some really specific things I like to use Photoshop's more powerful filters on. But, it's kind of weird to me today because on one hand, it's very hard to kind of look at people today and see it as them not getting exposed to content development from a superficial standpoint, because a lot of these people come from backgrounds where they use social media shit, and there's a lot more transparency for programmers and artists and stuff like that posting content as they're working on it for stuff like games. So I would think that a lot of people tend to get more exposed to that today than they did, back in my day, and therefore have a greater understanding of at least the kind of things you need to know to really be successful. But it is surprising to see some people come in and claim to be adults, but never having actually used the internet before, and say they're going to make a campaign exclusively for vanilla StarCraft and then use their campaign. I just can't fucking get away from that. That guy is a clinical case of insanity who's intentionally tried to just time capsule himself for some reason. It's super bizarre.
Well, I definitely can't speak to the motivation, but the question mark for me is the flip side of not giving a fuck about the quality and rushing it and trying to be really just being overly concerned with time, basically, which is symptomatic of everything else.
Yeah.
The back end of that is when you end up with a project that is the product of such a process, you're looking at something that is not worth more than 3 sentences in some lunatic's Google sheet as a summary.
Chronicles 3.
Yeah, and we made a 2.5 hour review or whatever. But when you don't give a shit about the project as much as you give a shit about making a project, which even then sounds fallacious to me, because if you actually cared about the act of making something, you would want to do it well. But whatever your actual motivation is, contrast it against the motivation you should have if you're looking to make a piece of interactive software that falls into or produces content that is not worth anyone's time. And that is the problem. Like that is the back end. That's the result of not, actually looking
it's such a
for the
baffling
excess
thing.
Yeah.
Like, you expect someone to spend so much time playing your project. Why don't you spend time in creating an experience for them? Like, because so many people would tell me they don't want to make a mod because they can't get as many players, which is a really stupid argument. But, let's take that for a second and say, okay, they're really concerned about people getting access to their project. Well, then in that case, they owe it to themselves to put in as much time as possible to make their project as high as quality as possible. But none of the maps that these people produce are a high quality at all. So they basically defeated themselves.
Listen, when you limit your player base to remastered, that's already like a fucking bad idea.
God.
But beyond that,
yeah, I bet you none of these fucks in remastered are even taking advantage of it.
No, but most of the people are not actually limiting themselves. It's just that they're making it cross-compatible, or not most of these people, I guess. So some people are making it cross-compatible in theory.
Oh, that's even dumber.
The problem is when you have a situation where you're asking people nicely not to use Brood War tech in your campaign, you've already lost. Like, it's not even a campaign.
Just use fucking StarCraft if you want to keep it traditional, man. Just disable the fucking buttons.
Well, no, you can just disable the tech, but then it becomes a Brood War map because you interacted with Brood War tech. So it has to be a Brood War map in order to disable that stuff. And they're explicitly making it a StarCraft map and not a Brood War map. Like, it's just such we keep coming back to it because it's such a fucking puzzling, asinine choice to make. And there is no justification for it.
It's like pushed a case study of somebody who's, like, mentally ill.
When pushed on the idea, the goalposts constantly shift. Oh, I'm going to make it using Star Edit because that's what Blizzard had. Oh, Blizzard's not supporting Star Edit now? And so my claims of accessibility so that everybody can open my maps are no longer valid because everybody has to use SEM draft because Star Edit doesn't fucking work on the latest patch. Well, it's just the spirit of what I mean. That's why I'm doing it. Like, it's just like you point out a reason to not do anything that they're doing, and they come up with some other reason that doesn't make any sense. That's just like, it's just sunken cost. It's like you can't admit you're fucking wrong and move on. Yeah. Like, I don't even care if you admit you're wrong. You can do that by virtue of making a better project that actually makes use of everything that we have. Like, that is an admission that you were doing it wrong before and that you've learned from that mistake, which shouldn't have anything to do with your ego related to somebody on the internet telling you that you're doing it wrong. Like, I don't know what their motivation is. I'm just assuming that has something to do with it. But for all I know, they're just decided that, like, they've created an echo chamber where a bunch of people will say that they made good content and agree to play without fucking Brood War tech, i.e. an incomplete game state, against an AI that's filled with pre-placed shit and broken scripts. And that's their idea of content. Like, okay, you can keep lying to yourself, but that's all you're doing, and you're not going to make anything memorable beyond memorable for being stupid. Like, the discussion around your projects is now more notable and notorious and infamous than your actual projects, because your actual projects are so fucking forgettable that I honestly can't believe that I watched an entire playthrough of the latest project and nothing happens ever. Like, you're just alone in the map. Like, wow, it really is Antioch.
It's like, it reminds me of the Jay Barrino shit, people just slap together crap as fast as possible just to get him to record it. Not because they want to make a project and he records it, but because they want to be validated by him. They want to have someone acknowledge their existence. They want someone to tell them that they're alive, effectively. It's the same shit with all the fucking genderisms going on, as people just need some kind of identity or validation to cling to, and in return you have the other half of the coin. Jay Barrino needs these people to tell him that he's relevant because he has all these subs and they don't actually result in any video engagement whatsoever. But if people make content for him to cast, then it makes him feel like he actually has a place in the world. So that keeps him going.
I can't assume motivation on behalf of anybody, but I do know at least one person who did expressly make multiple campaigns for the sole purpose of them being played by him. So I can corroborate what you're saying for the first part anyway.
Yeah,
I don't know about the rest. All I remember is the fact that I had a private conversation with Jay Barrino, and what I remember taking away from it is he actually does not respect the authors of any of these campaigns because he will privately talk about how bad they are, but publicly never say anything close to that kind of criticism.
Oh, that's the case for everybody. I'm sure Jay Barrino is probably just as bad-mouthed as any one of us, but the second that comes out, it breaks the illusion. But that's the case for everyone. Everyone's got a public face and everyone's got their face. Yeah. And, even I've got that to an extent. I have to watch what I say because if I say what's on my mind, then I'm probably going to have the KGB on my door asking me for autographs and then the FBI at my door putting lead into my skull. So, there's things that
we went to Alex Jones territory, apparently.
Yeah. I know about the lizard. Oh, no, shit.
It's over.
So, there's things you can say and don't say, but it's also like a lot of these people don't make projects because they, sometimes they make a project because it's a parody of things where they have an idea of some kind. But, anybody who's making a project based in a Blizzard's world, they've already come to accept that they're just not creative people, that they don't want to have any kind of creative adventure, that they're, not very invested into the whole content creation thing because they've already abandoned, obviously they've already all abandoned any pursuit of quality or consistency to begin with because they're basing something on a fanfic. But
you hear that, UED Commander?
You're making a fanfic in a fanfic.
You fuck.
Your Space Marines are still Space Marines. Your Imperial Guard are still Imperial Guard. You can't escape it. That's the fucking... You let this horse out of this stable. Now fuck him.
That's very rude.
And, but it's also like they don't want to be imaginative or creative because they're deciding to make a fanfic. A fanfic is an admission that you're not a creative person. And, I've seen lots of great /fic for Harry Potter, but it's still fanfic. It's still, you've absolved yourself of the responsibility of being creative. So you're just going to take somebody else's work and tack some shit onto it. And you're not going to do a great job. It doesn't matter how much time you put into it or whatever, you're not the original author. So it's always going to be, at the very best, controversial. If not, an outright slapstick mess.
I will say in defense of UED Commander, as I do actually have a different opinion on this. I think if you're using it as a stepping stone to write your own original content, and you're basically just using the default lore or whatever as an anchor, and then you're going in different directions, that plays very differently, or you experience something very different from something like that versus something that's literally like a straight up recreation or again, like a more straightforward
what I'm really targeting
fanfic.
with this statement is there was the one fucking comment, I don't know if it was in your server or somewhere else I saw.
Listen, there's many Fagudo
someone
screenshots.
said they prefer... Hang on, let me see if I can dig it up here. It's somewhere in here.
It's in the special box.
I want to fucking read it out because it's so fucking stupid.
Yeah. Dig through those Fagudo
Little
screenshots.
African licorice drops. I missed that one. That's a fucking good one. I really like that one. Where is this fucking shit?
Is it faithfulcuck.png?
Oh, it was something somebody said where they liked people who made stuff in Blizzard's setting with Blizzard missions or some fuck ass
I reposted
shit like
it
that.
for you.
Oh yeah, there you go. Engaging playthrough and spot on commentary as always. You're not the first one noticing some similarities between my works and those of Juxtapose. It's probably due to the fact that both of us try to stay faithful as much as possible to the StarCraft lore and also to the style of the original campaigns.
Gross.
Okay, notwithstanding this guy just implied that StarCraft has any lore, and that's yikes. But also that Blizzard has a style for their autistic campaigns slapped together by a bunch of power tripping nobodies who didn't even understand how their own game worked. Double yikes. This guy basically said that his works have not a shred of originality or creativity in them. He didn't want to explore anything. He was trying to basically parrot the absolute bare minimum of effort. And that's what I'm targeting, is that when you approach something with this kind of mindset, you kind of like kneecap the whole growth thing. Because you've already set your standards as low as possible. And now, I'm using Blizzard's example for this, but that kind of goes with anything. Let's say, for example, you want to make a game in Unreal 4, and your goal is to make StarCraft or make League of Legends. That's not that difficult to do. I mean, it's difficult in the sense you got to have a lot of technical skill, sure. But copying somebody else's work is, low-hanging fruit. Again, this is something that absolves yourself of the responsibility of pursuing anything at all.
Well, you can tell very clearly when there is some sort of absolving of your own responsibility when it comes out as an excuse. Like you're using that as a reason for why there are drawbacks, where somebody critiques something and your response is not, I see that your critique is either valid or invalid based on this is my response to it. That's that way because, and then insert some sort of psychotic apologism like Blizzard's style and lore. When you're using your the foundations of your project as an excuse for why your project has flaws instead of retaliating or not retaliating, responding to the argument at hand. You're dismissing it based on a foundational aspect of your project. All that does is admit that your project is foundationally flawed and there's something stopping it from ever being not flawed. And that's something it's just essential to the project in the first place, if that's exactly what you're talking about. And that is that. I mean, in this case, it was responding to praise apparently, or just some generic comment. But in my experience, talking to people like this, you say, "Hey, you're flawed because your project is flawed because it has no functioning AI," and they say, "Well, that's a characteristic of my project that it uses default AI." Okay, great. Glad we had this talk.
Well, furthermore, it's also a way of saying that you have no desire to improve as a person or make your project any good. Because let's say you make a finished project and it's successful, but you're only as successful as whatever you were copying. You're only as good as Blizzard's official campaigns. I mean, that's a terrible metric to rate any work by. I would consider that a grand insult unworthy of my worst enemy to say that their work is like Blizzard. I've seen a lot of absolute garbage projects, but to me, they're not fucking Rexar bonus campaign tier, and that's a pretty big bar of insult to go by. But there's people who try to make that, and they're saying they want to target that, which means they don't actually want to make good projects. And even if their project was technically feature complete, they're stuck in that corner because they've never escaped the shadow of what it is they're trying to create. They're basically saying they're happy being, forgettable and without shape or identity because they're making something in the shadow of an unrelated shape or identity, trying to mimic it while also trying to be it. They're just basically living a parasitical existence. And that's why shit like what Chris does, where all he does is just take other people's work and tack his name onto it, is parasitical. He accomplishes fucking nothing. Nobody's going to go through this shit a second time if they've already gone through it first time, and nobody's going to go through it now because there pretty much is nobody playing projects at all, except for, I guess, Era Dallas, who for some reason visits CC after years of not having been there. But okay, it's not worth the effort when you could just take like a couple weeks, figure out the basics of modding, put together your own project, figure out the basics of development, and explore things on your own. At the very least, it might teach you how to remaster other people's fucking work, without their permission or anything, and actually make real major positive changes to it, as opposed to just nerfing stuff into the ground because you're bad at video games or because it's a cheap piece of shit. At the very least, it would also give you some avenues to actually attempt to review stuff as opposed to saying you're reviewing things without actually reviewing it. But the whole goal of self-improvement and stuff like that isn't really a goal. And you were talking about how people kind of like get overwhelmed by the time commitment and then walk into something expecting to get it done on the spot, and that all kind of plays hand in hand to the wrong approach to something, and that's happened quite a bit actually. I don't have any recent examples because I haven't really talked to too many people getting started on mods, because most people are trying to get started on like Unreal 4 and stuff like that. But
yeah, if people are already at the determination that they're going to start in Unreal 4, they're okay with it taking a long time. I think like it's a different beast when you're tackling that versus when you're tackling.
Well, there are still
mod.
people who get into that problem, I think, with Unreal 4 a lot, is because they greatly underestimate how much work it is to get started. Like, yeah, you walk in with an engine, but you got to keep in mind, as opposed to something like StarCraft 2, where you have a bunch of assets in there. Not very good assets, but assets you can still at the very least use for placeholders. And Unreal 4, you don't really have that. Yeah, you can grab stuff off the marketplace, you can hound things for the monthly free stuff like that. You can reverse engineer stuff, but that's a lot of work for people who have never actually gotten into that before. I've tried to explain the whole process of extracting stuff with the U model before, and it's very basic, but nobody else has ever followed my footsteps. So the average Joe is not going to be able to put two and two together. The average Joe is expecting to walk into Unreal 4, maybe watch a couple of tutorials, and suddenly whip out the next fucking Minecraft. But it's actually substantially more difficult than that. And, I walked in there with a pretty a well-educated viewpoint of how stuff goes. And I had, help from people with experience in this kind of stuff. And I spent about 2 or 3 months on something. And, I did make some great progress in that time, but I also didn't have a project that was playable yet. And it was looking quite a long ways before I would have a demo that says, hey, you spawn in a map, you fight some enemies, and so on and so forth. I can deal damage to stuff, but, there's a big line between me being able to deal damage to enemies and kill them, quote unquote, where it just sets them to ragdoll. It doesn't even turn off their AI properly. And then having a level where I'm actually like fighting stuff and doing an objective or something. There is actually quite a big difference between the two. And getting stuff functional and figuring things out, because you have to like build the whole AI. So basically, you have the framework for the AI. You have the Blackboard system that controls it, but you have to actually build everything, including your own functions for it. So just figuring out how to do that requires some skills, including even some math skills that I'm just not very good at. So there's like all these unexpected difficulties where it's like, normally computers do the math for you, but you have to tell them what kind of math you need them to do. And I don't even know what to ask the computer to do for the math. So I'm really like walked in fucking ass naked into an alleyway on that one.
I think your example for this kind of context
escalates.
was like, you don't even have, like in StarCraft, you can do attack add to Zergling, but you got nothing in Unreal. You can't, there's no attack add function. Yeah. There's no reference to a Zergling. You got to build the Zergling. You got to build the function.
You don't even have a Zergling definition.
Yeah.
You have no way to tell it to add the Zergling. You have to tell it what the adding process even is.
Right. You got to define what that process is, and then you got to define what a Zergling is. Then you got to build the entity that is the Zergling so that you can reference that. So it's like a completely different process. It really is starting from scratch. more or less. I mean, even that's not really starting from scratch, but it's like the closest thing that you could probably get and still have a chance in hell at releasing something. I don't think that anybody could pull together their own engine, even though that does seem like it might be a Hail Mary at some point that I have to do, depending on how well suited Unreal ends up being, for netcode and all for an RTS. But that's obviously a different topic, but just something that I figured I would add. And speaking of context,
I think we talked about it before.
Yeah,
this
several
exact
times.
Same subject, where I was telling you that it's going to take a long time
for sure
to really get into it.
Yeah, and that's something that I'm okay with. Well, even if I'm not okay with it in the sense that I'm super happy about it, I understand it and accept it in that sense. And that also doesn't mean I'm not going to try to improve based on that and like make it even like, find some way to make the experience of producing it as easy as possible or as intuitive as possible or anything else as far as like my tool set goes. Definitely going to try to do that. But I just wanted to say before I forget about this, you mentioned Eridalis. That gentleman was he basically scared off the German translator I had for his campaigns by saying that he did not want consent to any translation because he wanted a full voiceover if it was going to be translated to English, and then scared off anybody who was interested in voice acting because he said they weren't good enough. So I just wanted to add that. That was his one contribution recently. That was like in the last 2 years. So a real man.
Yeah, I don't know. He commented on a lot of my shit way back. I think when I was doing StarCraft 2 videos still. And he disappeared, instantly crawled out of nowhere. I think he might be like Hitler or something.
Well,
like
if
his
the
ghost.
boot fits.
The ghost of Hitler passed. I just assume that all Germans are Hitler. I think he's German anyway. They're either Hitler or they're bronies that go to conventions and praise Michael Bay. That is unfortunately something I've also experienced.
As soon as you said praise Michael Bay, I knew who you were talking about. Didn't know he was also a brony convention goer.
I'm pretty sure he was a brony convention goer.
Well, both of them like shit.
I also remember him trying to tell me that decals were some newfangled amazing thing he discovered, and he's begging me not to tell anybody about them because you can get terrain in StarCraft 2 that doesn't look like it came out of complete vomit by just plastering it with decals and shit. And I was like, so how's this performance on your tiny little map with stacked shit? And he was like, not very good. And I was like, yep, that's what I thought. So,
imagine terrain
fellow.
being non-performant in an RTS.
Yeah, StarCraft 2's terrain's actually really bad. When you bring that camera horizontal like you would in a third-person game, and you've got those cliffs, it will chug fucking hard. It's really, really bad.
It's also probably some field of view shit or something.
I really don't know why, because they're very, very low poly. It's definitely something seriously wrong with their shitty fucking 1997 engine they've just tacked crap onto over the years.
Hey, remember when we went on like a viewing spree of StarCraft 2 Machinima? Why did we do that?
Oh, that was like a week ago. I don't want to remember.
You remember the chromatic
aberration? I was happy
aberration?
forgetting that. They're so bad. Like, the thing that makes them bad is the things that was so easy to fix. Like the choreography and the fucking chromatic aberration that never should have been there to begin with.
Yeah, it sort of like reminded me of the lighting in that Antioch map where we were like, this is something you deliberately fucked up. Like you deliberately did this. This is intentional.
It's baffling.
Why? But it's just like intentionally restricting yourself to vanilla. Damn fuckers.
No, this is even worse because it's like this is something that if you play the map like once and it just like burns out your fucking retinas or you can't read what's going on or whatever. Like, I guess maybe if the mapper was like running on like an ancient CRT that had blown out all of its fucking colors or something like that, he may not notice things anyways. But it was, at least to my knowledge, assumed at least one or two other people on that project actually played the maps once or twice. So someone else should have seen it, and the chances of them running on an equally terrible ancient monitor from the fucking Cold War or something was kind of unlikely. So I figured somebody would have brought that up, but like so many other things in that project, I feel like if anything was brought up, they were just swept aside because they were so concerned about time.
Listen, don't forget the dancing heads. Dancing heads.
Crazy. Like,
they were all dancing. Some of the cutscenes in general were just top-notch quality, like the fucking tree.
That tree. I will never, like, there are some things I will never forget, and that tree is one of them.
I have so rarely been, like yelling laughing. Like, that's not, like, you hear about crying laughing, but that was like I was in pain, and the laughter was the only way for the pain to escape. Like, you could, it was aggressive.
I was
and
so
vicious.
Bamboozled.
And then a crow flew by.
Everything. Not just the fact there was the tree in itself, but the fact that they threw it in so last minute, so carelessly, as if it was some kind of statement from the individual who put it in, that this is a stupid fucking idea. I can't believe I'm doing this. So have a look to see at the absurdity of how I feel right now. Where he, like, instead of matching the animation speed with the movement speed, he, like, flipped it like a full fucking 360 degrees and walked away. And threw his 360 out the window into a dumpster, and then pissed on it, and then threw up on it, and then pissed on it a second time. And then as a garbage truck came out, he yeeted himself into it as well. Like, it was just like his profound end of world statement of like a final fuck you to the world. Probably because he had to throw something else out to make this, and it probably had more like T-pose zealots being held in each other's hands or something.
Why did they throw a T-pose dancing head zealot into an altar?
Like that, all those fucking cinematics were just like, just do in-game StarCraft 1 cinematics. This is one case where I think it's acceptable to dial back and stick to something that Blizzard did. Because if what you produce is actually objectively worse than what they've done, then maybe you shouldn't do it. Like, everything should be done to some extent of moderation. There is such a thing as overextending your bounds, overextending your abilities. If you can't do it properly, don't do it. Because it will just fuck everything up. It's better to be simplistic and functional than over-engineered and completely fucked. And those cinematics are literally the worst cinematics of any game produced by individuals or companies or otherwise I have ever seen in my entire life.
Well,
and that is saying a lot because I've seen fucking Sonic cinematics.
Oh yeah, we gotta play those sometime. Fuck. Man, what dark hole did we crawl into accidentally to come out on the other end of the reality spectrum on this area? We're dealing with fucking Chris in Antioch.
I don't know, man. All these people are just insane. But that's what happens when you get into talking about other people making projects, is because typically the kind of people who end up in the spectrum of saying, I'm going to make a campaign or I'm going to make a mod and I'm going to talk about it in a forum, they're already fucking insane. Every single one of these people has got something fucking wrong with them. Some of them are just a lot better at hiding it than others. But a lot of them are just like completely fucked in the head ESL people. And the thing about ESL people is they usually come from cultures that are a lot more accustomed to walking into things and changing them or making their own stuff in it. Russia, in particular, really seems to have a lot of that going on. The Western Hemisphere, not so much.
Well, there was a guy from Spain who... I'll never forget this quote. You can actually search it up on Campaign Creations forums because this is where it came from. But somebody was editing a campaign by... The original author's username, I think, was literally just Marine, which is hilarious. But the new guy had a quote as he said that he reached out to the original author to try to get consent to edit something, as if that... He's at least he's more, he's more polite than Chris, but still. And his quote is... As we say in Spain, silence is consent. And like, holy shit, man. You can't just go around saying that on the internet.
God bless Spain. What a
So-
based and red-pilled country. Crow-pilled, even.
Crow-pilled. Yeah, I don't know about that. He's editing other people's work in StarCraft, but he's on there. He's
I mean,
on his
that's the
way.
go-to thing to do today.
True. Yeah.
Is you dredge up other people's shit piles they clearly don't want anything to do with, and you just shit on top of them.
Yeah, and then you
you
email
say
your
it's
shit to
remastered.
somebody else with some blackmail attached.
But I think that's I think that actually fits really well in with the original subject, because this is undoubtedly somebody who probably before all this started tried to make something himself and then couldn't scrounge up the motivation to actually do it, and thought, well, I still want to be popular, I still want to be recognized as an authority, I still want people to praise my name, I still want to be looked up to, I still got to show those bullies at school that I'm good for something. So he thinks, well, I've got some basic bare bone knowledge. I know how to start Star Edit. I know how to change numbers. So why don't I just take other people's work and change it? But there is that transition period before he reaches that point where he decides to switch from, making something, at least as an idea, to just fucking around with the shit that other people did. And that transition point is the death of motivation, the death of aspiration, the death of really the desire to do something productive as opposed to nothing. And I think that's something every single person who makes a project, no matter how motivated when they start or how long they work on it, is eventually going to cross and eventually going to have to face, just because development is never actually going to go smooth. And that includes when you actually complete something. I mentioned workflow and tools and stuff like that, because that's usually where a lot of this will come from, or if it's too frustrating to work with something, you may get something done and then it'll feel as a relief, and then you won't want to, instinctively want to avoid it, because as much as people may want to consider themselves disciplined or whatever, when it comes to doing something they don't enjoy, they will innately, instinctively trying to find ways to avoid it. That's why so many people stop playing games and say, oh, I must be too old to play games anymore. Nope, it's that instinct kicking in and telling them, these games are shit! You're not enjoying them! You just haven't figured out to actually fucking realize it yet. You're being too apologetic. The problem isn't you. You're not too old to play games. Games are just shittier than they were before. Your standards have improved, games have gone down. You expect more out of your entertainment, you're not getting that value for your time. So you are instinctively turning away. And you will see that in all kinds of play patterns, and that's why games try to lock you in with stuff like dailies and stuff like that, is to try to keep you coming back so that you have the sunken cost fallacy. And a project and a development can do that too, which can lead to a very toxic interaction where you are starting to build something for the sake of doing it, for the sake of getting something out, than actually because you are enjoying it. And I think that if you reach that stage and you realize you've reached that stage, you actually should just drop your project, at least temporarily, and come back at a much later time.
Yeah, I have to agree with the temporarily part specifically, because I think you reach a very big catch-22, a very dangerous crossroads where it could be that you're not motivated enough to work on your project because of issues that you can fix that might be related to your project workflow and might be related to your own personality or some other issue that's going on. That would be something that where if you drop it for a while, you'll be able to fix those issues, focus on those issues, and then come back and be more productive. But you could also run into a situation where you're dropping it too early just because, rather because you're dropping it because of the fact that you want to fix some other underlying issue. It could be that you're dropping it when you don't actually need to drop it in order to resolve the issue. It could just be that it's sort of like the idea of conquering your inner bitch, as Joe Rogan says while huffing DMT, is you could say that, there's things that you have to do in order to get whatever goal you're looking for done and accomplished. And if you can do those, you can make yourself do those. If you can make yourself get up every morning and do modding streams like I do, then eventually you'll get there. And that's just a necessary step along the way. And even when you don't feel like doing it, you still do it. And then you get some motivation from that because you still did it. You did that inner bitch conquering. And you go from there into the idea of like, well, is it really a fault of the underlying issue of the project that I need to take a step back and figure out? Or is this something that I just need to figure out on my own and something that I can fix without sacrificing development time or without sacrificing development focus or something like that? And just temporarily stepping back as opposed to calling it quits immediately. Even if you think that it's most likely something that you need to call quits on immediately, just taking a step back to make that determination honestly and without rushing to it would be, I would say, like that's the biggest thing that I can recommend is taking a break, a short break if necessary, figure out exactly what the issue or issues are, and then make some determination on how to fix that, because that's pretty much the only way that you're going to avoid this kind of issue in the future as well. Forget about like right now. As planning long term, that's what you have to do. And I guess in general, you made a pretty good point earlier about like people basing their content around Blizzard's work, even if they're trying to do something different in terms of like an originality or creativity standpoint. If they're also looking at it as like, I want to make something that is of the caliber of Blizzard's work, that is a very fallacious point to start on, because there is not really any respectable caliber of work that Blizzard has ever produced. And so you can't look at that as a standard. But if people lie to themselves and say that that is good, or they delude themselves, or if they genuinely believe it because they haven't been crow-pilled yet, then whatever the case may be.
Oh my God.
Crow-pilled.
Every time that gets used non-ironically, I feel like I'm caught in that huge fucking vapor cloud surrounding Alex Jones. He's just rolling around in rainbows.
Rolling around in rainbows. Anytime they have not, whatever they're doing to make themselves believe that that's a reasonable position to hold, that is sunken cost fallacy in a different sense. It's actually, like, I think more nefarious than dealing with sunk cost fallacy in the context of a single project, because at the very least, at some point, you got to face the music, or you release it and it's terrible. So either you drop it or you release it, and neither are really good if it's the result of sunk cost fallacy, but you can learn from it and move on and fix something for the next stage. But if you perpetually exude this behavior and demonstrate that you believe this lie or believe this fallacious point and use that as argument, as your argumentation for why you're still doing it, whatever it is you're doing, in this case, making shitty campaigns, that speaks to sunk cost fallacy in your process. Like you're not willing to reverse engineer why your process is flawed and really analyze that and improve. You're not willing to improve at all if that's what you're going for. You maybe improve in some superficial aspect, like improving working with shitty tools that are outdated and broken, like StarEdit. You may improve in, seeing what you can actually do. In this case, that juxtapose guy that was referenced in the screenshot that we just grabbed from Faguto is actually winning out in a sense. I haven't seen him do anything else since his first campaign, but the premise for his first campaign was he's going to not use SCM draft, not because he doesn't want to use SCM draft, but because he wants to see what he can do just in StarEdit, so that he can then contrast it with what he can do in SCM draft. I don't think that's a reasonable thing to do anyway, but when you paint it like that, at the very least, assuming I take you at your word, and I don't think that you're just lying and making up an excuse to hand wave away any concerns of you using StarEdit in fucking 2018 or 2019 or whenever this guy made his campaign, it still speaks to an understanding that eventually you're going to move on from StarEdit. The question is just, you want to see, like, here's what I can make with this environment, and then you have a reference point. That is entirely your own, as opposed to a reference point from Blizzard looking at what Blizzard made. And usually that's enough for most people. It's enough to convince them that they need to use something else. But if you need more motivation for that, or you need more argumentation for that, maybe making your own campaign in StarEdit makes some sense in that sense. I still don't think it does, but I can see justification for it. I can't see justification for it if you've demonstrated that every single campaign is made through this process, and that tells me that you have sunk cost fallacy in your process, which is way worse than in just one project.
Mm-hmm. I think that it's really important to be always looking to improve and always looking to advance and always looking to move forward. Just in general, that's why I think it's really important that you try to explore tools and pipelines and workflows and stuff like that, because the reality is the vast majority of these people are never going to complete projects at all. They're never going to get to the stage where Andrew Rosa is at, where he actually releases whatever he works on, to whatever extent it is, even though it's just, him taking other people's work and touching stuff in it. it doesn't really matter. He released it, and that's more than what the vast majority of people are actually going to do. Now, one can only hope that this guy kind of like maybe like goes outside once and gets some fresh air and comes back in and realizes, oh shit, I'm a silly goose. I'm a goofball. And maybe, get up to speed with like the last 20 years. But I mean, one will hope that at that point he also decides, maybe I'm going to make my own project. And working in steps like that is perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine to go slow and to measure your pace and go at your own pace and improve at your own pace. The important thing is that so long as you're building stuff, you're actually doing that, because that's really what the whole goal is. I mean, that's the goal of playing games in general, is to always be improving, to always be moving forward, to always, be looking for more new challenges, and to look for accomplishment as a result. And a part of making projects is doing that, and for some cases that's the grind, for other cases it's exploring new material. And I, for one, had a lot of, there's a word for it, but I'm Canadian and not particularly intelligent. A lot of reservation about my own abilities when it came to stepping into something as complicated as Unreal 4, because although I have brushed shoulders a lot with programming and read a lot of scripting and dabbled a little bit with stuff like Lua and things like that, I've never before worked with visual scripting. I've never worked with especially a visual scripting that's interacting directly with low-level code. I've never worked with low-level code too much. The Galaxy and stuff like that doesn't count, and because that doesn't even give you any access to any features. To then expect myself to walk in with, very, very superficial experience where I can barely read some syntax, and only if it's really labeled well, to now basically start from scratch and build my own game systems, I thought that was too much. So for a long time I didn't really want to try, because I felt I wouldn't be able to do it, and I felt it was a waste of my time to really get involved with that. Well, in the span of a month, I not only did that, I did things that pretty much no game developer has done to this day, which is make stuff like Z navigating AI in an action RPG. And like I said, there's still a lot of, functionality that does not exist. But the fact is that those proof of concepts do exist. They're functional, and I created them. And that was something, as simple as it is still something that a lot of people haven't done, and something I didn't expect I could do. Not because I didn't think I would be able to get the skills to do it, but because I didn't think I would be able to keep motivated enough to get those skills to do it. So there's like a huge difference that comes down to really like sitting down and actually doing it. And I talk to a lot of people about like the video projects and stuff like that. There's dozens, probably hundreds of people who really like think and say the same thing. Just in my viewer base alone, when it comes to making videos, there's always a lot of flailing around, and what someone will say is something like, you need to stop thinking and just do it. But that's not so easy, and I understand that. I especially understand that because I can't just stop thinking and then just start casting. My energy doesn't work like that, and the same as for producing a lot of projects. But also, there is a lot of times where there's too much planning, there's too much consideration. A lot of times, you basically just need to take your pants off and jump into the kiddie pool. And you're going to start a splash, and the cops are going to come, and you're probably going to end up in jail for a while. Maybe you'll meet Bubba, maybe you'll meet Tyrone, maybe you'll meet the Buddha. But along the way, you'll have learned an experience. You'll have learned that kids can bite very hard. You'll have learned that the water probably had piranhas in it. You'll probably learn that maybe you're allergic to chlorine, but you learned something. That's the important part. You have to be prepared to not only spend a lot of time, but probably make a lot of mistakes and probably end up failing. But like I've always said, you cannot succeed without failing. If you just succeed out of nowhere, you don't actually really learn anything at all, and that's not that valuable. But if you happen to walk into something and you fail a whole bunch of times, then you can kind of understand the hows and whys surrounding your failure, suddenly you understand, more importantly, how success can be obtained and how more consistently success can be obtained. And that's certainly one of the more important things of accomplishing stuff when you're making milestones in your project, however small, or if they're just components to stuff, such as, for example, when I'm making maps. Like I said in one of the last podcasts, I've been having repeated difficulties with making stuff readable for the players. So I've been experimenting on all this stuff. And yeah, it's really frustrating to have to keep going back to maps I've already had to go back to, up to like 3 or 4 times because of what I would perceive to be read issues, and then learn there's a whole bunch of other issues out of fucking nowhere. And I have to review like 20, 30 maps and rebake all of them, readjust everything, and blinds too. Blinds in a lot of cases. I don't know if these changes are really helping the players or not. That's how we actually get into the game. But along the way, I learn little bits and pieces. When we do have a success, it's something I can apply to everything else. Then when I make a wholly new map like that lab, I can make an assessment and say, ahead of time, I know what's going to work and what's not going to work. And then that's information that really just reinforces everything else I've already learned. And it just keeps building an ever larger reservoir of knowledge about how information is processed by other people, how the information I create is being processed by other people. That's really the key thing. It's not just, I'm watching people absorb information. I'm watching people absorb the information that I have created. And that's really, really, really enormously different. Really, 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 really massive difference. Because now you understand 2 perspectives as opposed to 1 or 1.5 at the absolute best. Being your perspective and theirs versus your understanding and then their perspective, or just their perspective, depending on the content you're watching, such as, for example, a professional game of Brood War or League or something like that. Unless you're a developer for League, you do not have that accurate perspective, no matter how much you actually know the game, because you don't know the actual intent behind everything. Knowing the intent is really important, and that's going to be the driving force behind why you created the content to begin with. So, it's demotivating to find that content didn't turn out well or was incomplete.
Yeah, whatever the contrast was between your intention and what the player took from it.
Yeah. But at the same time, you can get mad about it, or you can blame other people, or you can look at the experience and be like, well, let's disseminate to what I can and use that to improve. So that's what I do. Because there is no choice but to move forward. That's the whole thing about making content. And you have to be prepared for that. You have to be prepared to lose a lot of time, a lot of energy, and constantly go back and redo work. Stuff that you felt really, really good about, you might be tearing down next day, and that has happened to me a lot. So, that's going to be demotivating, especially. But if you are in it to make the project, then I think you already will concede that there is going to be a lot of trials. And even if you do concede to that, and even if you do accept that, I think you are still going to be underestimating just how bad that will be. So the other thing I will tell you to do is to measure your advance, which is to say, don't bite off too much at once. As a broad example, let's say you're getting into Unreal 4, you want to make a shooter or a StarCraft or something like that. You're looking at needing to get into graphics and programming and all this other shit. You've arrayed for yourself the most complicated things that you can really do for making something in a pre-built engine. So if you try to tackle all that at once, you're going to have problems. So you need to measure yourself out. If you want to get your feet wet in all of them, then I recommend only getting introduced into the interfaces for all of them at once. Getting accustomed to bringing in basic shapes into Unreal and then making them do stuff like shoot projectiles or move around or stuff like that. And then advance from that point to like putting in stuff with bones and then interacting with the bones in Unreal. Integrating all those different things together so that you learn how all those things work together as you build up is a great way to learn about the relationships of how data between different file formats and then the engine actually work, how things are translated from, your package like 3ds Max into Unreal with something like Blueprint or C++. And, that's a way to start off. That's a basic way to start off, and it's very paced. And then if it turns out it's too much work for you or you don't really enjoy it, then you don't really lose too much. But you've learned a lot about how game data interacts now. And that's really important if you're going to continue working with games, because now you know so many ways that you can break games that you didn't know before, and breaking games is always entertaining.
As a sort of closing topic, you mentioned earlier that generally speaking, you're not going to do anything, like people are not going to release campaigns most of the time, even if their intentions are good and they want to release something quality. And you contrasted that with Andrea Rosa releasing...
They'll never actually complete it.
3 campaigns, because 3, if you can even call Enslavers Remastered a campaign. And the sort of catch-22 that I see here, or like the paradox here, is like... there's actually 2 sets. The first one I think is easier to diffuse, but it's the idea that... is it, it's sort of the question of, is it better to release something, even if it's horrendously flawed, versus releasing nothing, but actually trying to do something good? Like, I think we're both on the side of the latter being what you want, but, whether or not there's any argumentation to be had there is a supposed other story, I guess. I can't really try to steam that position.
Stuff is pointless.
Yeah.
Like,
by
just
itself,
in general.
Like, the project itself needs to be the justification.
Is. Like, I mean, if you want to release something, then go ahead. But only release it when it's finished, and if you really feel like it's, like, really worth... you shouldn't really approach that subject before you're finished.
Right.
Like, I had this problem very recently where I started to become more and more conscious of how well I was playing in the games I was casting. And this is because usually after releasing a video, I talk to quite a few people who go through the videos. And a lot of people would say, you're a bad player. And yeah, I'm a bad player. Like, I'm probably not as bad as somebody like Jay Barino. I mean, I definitely know I play RTSs better. But when it comes to something like JRPGs or stuff like that, I have no fucking idea what I'm doing at all. When you tack that onto the fact that I don't actually play games outside of casting, and my casting at the best of times was still really inconsistent, there's some pretty embarrassing stuff in my videos. But I don't edit my videos at all. There's no cuts at all. It's the whole fucking thing. So at some point, I started to think, a lot of people are getting distracted by the bad play over everything else, even though a lot of people watch the videos for that. But... that to me was like the instant I started to think about that was a really bad thing, where I started to become conscious about performance, about something that I wasn't even, like, I don't stream, like, I did stream the Dark Souls 3 randomizer, but that's like a 1 in 1,000 thing, and then I started to think about something that wasn't even like a factor in me actually playing, and then I was making decisions in my play based on something that wasn't even... like, something that should never have crossed my mind to begin with. That was like a super massive toxic interaction that I realized was happening actually during the Dark Souls 3 randomizer run. And I really thought about that for a really long time. And you shouldn't ever be thinking about what somebody else is going to say or what somebody else might think or whatever. Like, I'm going to make fun of every single fucking person who doesn't make graphics, who doesn't do voice acting, who doesn't make their own writing, and I am going to continue to make fun of you until you start to at least show that you actually want to put some effort into making your project. Why? Because it's 2020 and this shit's so fucking easy to get into. Anybody can do it, and many people are getting into it. And the only people who aren't getting into it and trying to pass off stuff as being fucking similar to the original campaigns, they're just deluding themselves. I'm gonna make fun of you for that. But the thing is that shouldn't be a factor for you when you're actually making your project. You should just not release your project. That doesn't mean you shouldn't enjoy making your project. That doesn't mean you shouldn't enjoy sharing it with your friends or whatever. But typically speaking, when you go into a place that's for like major campaigns and toll conversions and stuff like that, and you release your campaign, you're going to be judged by those standards. And you shouldn't feel bad that you're being laughed at. You shouldn't feel bad that people are saying stuff. Typically speaking, it's not going to be a personal attack. But at the same time, the whole process of releasing stuff in general is just really unnecessary. No one really is obligated to release anything. They shouldn't feel obligated to release anything. They really shouldn't even bother releasing anything. Like, there's really just not much point. And for a long time, I really wrestled with that with my own, like my video projects. I've privatized everything other than my video projects at this stage. But there's even a large chunk of video projects and audio projects I'll never release because I just don't see really any point in it. Like, why bother? All the people that I talk to in regards to this stuff, I already have direct contact to. I already have ways of giving files to them if I want them to see stuff or if they want to see stuff. I gain nothing by having public exposure, and that's the same case for basically everybody. But the big problem is regardless of whether you release it or not, is so many people are thinking about this shit before they're even fucking done the projects. Again, Antioch Chronicles 3. Yeah. Again, Dwarven Combat. Again, StarCrafts, Carve-Out StarCrafts. People are worried about the public exposure and their Reddit posts and fucking whatever. Your project's not even fucking done yet. Like, don't give a shit about this stuff. Worry only about you. And just don't give a fuck about anybody else. Don't give a fuck about your friends. Unless they're actually helping you with the project, you don't even need to talk to them about it. Unless you need their feedback or something like that, then great. But, most people don't need to know. Most people, like, interacting with them is just energy you could be spent working on your project. Now, some people see that as detoxing from development. Okay. But again, at the same time, if you're detoxing from development, you really should distance yourself completely from it. If you're going to be spending time with your friends or whoever talking about stuff, do it with something that isn't the project. Go play fucking Fortnite or something. Go dab on someone. Like, don't, if you want to distance yourself, distance yourself. Don't half-ass it. You got to treat everything as you would a job without actually being a job. And that means you got to treat your relaxation seriously as well.
Oh yeah, that goes back to something that I've really made a principle in my life is if I'm going to relax, I'm going to fully ass the relaxation. You know what I mean? Like I'm not going to be like feeling guilty about it where I'm like, oh, I'm procrastinating. Yeah. I should be doing something else. Like I should be doing exactly what I'm doing, watching a movie or whatever. Like leisure time needs to be deliberate and fully experienced. Otherwise, there's no point to it.
Yeah.
So the other paradox
you absolutely
I have for
need to know when to distance yourself.
Social distancing, that is.
Well, in a way, that's what it is because a project is like a dialogue.
It's a kind of a
usually
crystallization.
Trying to wrestle with something.
And it's like, where are you at right now? What's your skill level? Like, what's going on there?
Yeah. And what have you got to do? How are you going to get there? What's in your way? What unexpected things are hiding, how much time has gone, how much time is left, all the various interactions. It is a dialogue. That's how I viewed it for a long time. And then you ask, like, one of the main parts of the dialogue is asking the question, like, is this worth it? How much energy am I going to have to spend? What's my target goal for today? What can I do today? What should I do today? Should I do anything? I like to try to break it down into those sorts of things. Like I wake up in the day, and if I have my D&D game in 2 days, then my dialogue changes a lot from like when I wake up. Today, it's like I'm going to do yard work. So I woke up at 6 p.m. I stayed up for about an hour. I went back to sleep. I woke up at 12:30 p.m. I gave the cat her food and her drugs. And I said, okay, I'm going to stay up until 8. We'll head out as soon as the noise curfew is up, and I'll start. So that's what I did. And I came back in. It's fucking 10 o'clock. I'm beat up. And then I got to do a whole bunch of other shit. And then we do this podcast. And I say, okay, that's my day. I'm going to go to sleep as soon as we're fucking done. And today, I did not do anything for D&D at all. And that's great. That's fine. I would like to do stuff. It would have been nice. but I really didn't do too much. I think before I went out and did the lawn, I poured it in 2 graphics. I verified I had some data on my website, and that's just like 10 minutes tops. And that's great. Now, 2 days from the game, I'll step it up and I'll say, okay, we are actually going to go through all of our content that we realistically can go through in this game and see what needs to be done and break that down. And then I divide my things by the day. And I tend to procrastinate a fuck ton. There is so much time I spend staring at a fucking wall or whatever, or, you know, getting fucked up by insomnia or whatever. You know, a lot of time just kind of disappears. So I try to segregate stuff. Now, that's not a normal development schedule. And for me, it's not a normal development schedule because I always tell people, don't give a fuck about time. Who cares? You know, who cares if it takes a month? Who cares if it takes a year? Listen, if you want to do something other than take slavers and just, you know, put an extra ultralisk in it, you're going to be looking at an exponentially increasing amount of time. Even if you're not involving external skills like 3ds Max or whatever, to actually test this stuff and make sure it actually works properly, that can take quite a bit of time, especially if you're juggling all this other crap like I am. What matters more than how much time you spend is how you spend that time. You know, a lot of that time is going to be spent testing. So you need to think about how you're going to test. You need to do unit testing. Unit testing is taking each individual element and then testing it on its own. And when you know that something works precisely and perfectly and is intentionally precisely how you want it to be with no problems at all on its own, then you can start introducing other elements so that when you inevitably encounter problems later down the line, you can know it's an interaction between elements rather than an individual element. You don't spend even more time trying to hunt down shit. You know, it's one basic thing. Super important, time consuming, but helps you. It makes your life so much easier and so much less stressful. Managing your stress is the first part to managing your motivation. If you're getting stressed out, it's because your time management is not working out a lot of the time. You're putting too much time into something, you're getting too worked up something, you're getting OCD over it. It's time to either take that break or to shift gears and work on something else. And that's going to happen a lot. It happens to me in videos where I would edit something for a super long time and I would burn out. And then I would finish it and I wouldn't want to touch it ever again. And that is what has happened. That is why I have not touched Sonic 2006 since fucking 2008-ish. I have a massive editing project amongst so many others I've not touched for literal years because I was doing all kinds of editing shit. And I got really sick and tired of doing it, but I kept doing it because I had so much of it and I didn't take those breaks. And it got to the point where I just fucking hated it and I didn't want to do it anymore. And so I stopped doing it. And now I have all this shit I really wish I could work on that I just don't really want to do. But now I have to figure out how to way to motivate myself to get done because I want to get those video projects done because I think they'll be good. You know, and that's something I want to get out. That's people want me to get out and I wanted to get out. But that's not enough to get me going. So, you know, if I ever figure out the whole fucking magical solution to actually figuring out how to pull motivation right out of my ass, I'll let you know. Until then, all I can let you know is the strategies I use to try to fight it from getting to that point where I need to pull it out of my ass.
I do think it's kind of interesting that the D&D time limit that you have is so effective at making you not procrastinate. But I almost feel like you look at that and you think, oh, that's a benefit, but you forget the fact that like maybe if there was no time limit, there would be less procrastination in general, because it's like you're almost like you get used to that habitual nature of like not doing anything for a while and then doing everything last minute or doing a lot of stuff last minute. And then you're like, well, since that's a given because the next time limit is like a week from now or something, then whatever, I'll just do the same thing because it worked out last time.
Yeah.
Instead of like being really consistent.
Yeah. It can be really bad when you do that because that is what happens. But then because your workload changes every single time, sometimes it's a lot of work where I literally am spending like every hour that I have free like scrambling to do stuff, which has been the case for like the last 6 months now as I've been working almost nonstop. And
well, it's the same way you're going to burn yourself out as the editing. And
you can't afford to burn yourself out when you're on this because you got, 4 other people depending on you. to deliver your content to a consistent state of quality every single week. So that's when you have to really get very conscious about how you're actually managing your time in and out of your development. Like out of my development, it's like, well, I like to sleep 16 hours a day, but with my insomnia, I only can sleep maybe 2 hours a day. But because of my insomnia, those 16 hours I would have spent to sleep, I'm here, but I'm not actually functional anyways. So how the fuck do I turn those times where I'm so fucking tired I can barely even keep my eyes open into something productive? And then, so I've just been wrestling with my sleep left and right, trying to find ways to get back rest, and I just can't. So I've just decided, well, if I can't focus enough to work on something, but I can't actually sleep and get energy, then I'm going to burn this time on trying to find stuff on the internet that I can work on later, because that's something I have to do anyways. I have to go image hunting. I have to find stuff to use for portraits. If I can find map tiles, that's great. Effect things, inventory icons. This stuff takes weeks, months to sort through on the internet, because the internet is so horrible to search through with all this useless AI-driven shit that tries to just guess what you're searching for instead of just giving you search results based on what you search for verbatim. And that takes a lot of time, and it doesn't really require me to be awake a lot. So that is where a lot of my time has gone through. And you know what? I'm lucky if I find like 3 usable things in a week. But that's 3 usable things I didn't have. So that's how my success is measured, is by finding assets I can use. 3. I chose that number for a reason.
Hollywood did 2. Hollywood
did
3.
Is to make the most of the time you've got, even if you really don't want to do anything. I try to do something.
Well, that's the thing, is like make the most of the time you got, even if it's leisure time too. Like obviously we just talked about that, but it's like if you've decided you're taking a bit of a social distancing from your project, Oh, my mother's destroying somebody. I suppose that's as good a time as any. Close this bad boy up. So, any final thoughts on TISM?
Solve it with alcohol and meth.
Smoke weed.
Smoke weed! We need gamers against COVID-19.
Don't read that article. It endangers
everyone in the world.
Don't read that article.
Including those African kids dying to Ebola. Those poor bastards. COVID-19's gonna get them first.
More like third.
Third. Right after fucking Hitler and Stalin, my brothers.
Words of wisdom from Hitler, 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 star, double nigger. Star, Hitler, Hitler, Hitler.
With fucked ass text.
Oh yeah, I forgot there's lines through it. You can't even really see it on the overlay.
It's right at the character limit for the client.
Oh, perfect.
Because he should know the jumbled up fuck is a character.
You're a character. Bye.
Your fucking face is a character!